Hi everyone, and thank you very much for the organizers for the honor to moderate the next discussion panel. I think I will say a few words about myself and my background, and then I will raise a few common questions because after every speaker has presented themselves, I would ask quite precise questions to each of you, but there are also some common questions. So I was born in Moscow, but I live in Finland since '94, so this summer it turned 30 years. As mentioned, I am an entrepreneur since 2002, dealing with all kinds of communication questions. I used to work as executive director of Finnish Association of Russian Speakers Organizations, and being also representing this organization many times on the integration forum here and also in other countries. I also used to work as a freelance journalist for Finnish national broadcast company, making news and reading news in Russian. But very interesting place I worked for 1 year called Culture for All, where my title was diversity advisor, and my first task was look through our website on your part of our website and see is it okay like that. And then I open it, and the part of the website started with a question: how can you promote diversity? And I thought that's the first problem, because to be honest, to answer this question, there are two ways to promote diversity. You either smuggle people from all different places, or you, I'm sorry, having unprotected sex with as many different women as possible from different backgrounds. You cannot promote diversity. You can learn to deal with it, you can learn to understand it, and this is also existing and ever-changing thing. So therefore I think this idea has been already in the morning, and I was very, very happy about that. But to the questions, to common questions, Finnish philosopher Esa Saarinen said once that our world is full of open, tolerant and empathic people. The only problem is that they are all under 5 years old. And actually, interesting thing is that when children play with each other, and I mean a practical play, not sitting on the computer or telephone, I hope it still happens, and then a new person arrives, a new child arrives. Of course, if the child wants to join them, and if they want the child to join the game, they won't say that, you know, we have certain values, and you have to accept our values, then you can play with us. Or that we have this attitude, or that we have this kind of agenda that we are. So they don't do this kind of thing. They simply explain what are the rules of the game. And they leave all this personal stuff as values, attitude, identity, actually out of the thing. And then another philosopher, I think Belgian or French, I don't remember, pardon me, remember his name, but he said once that the playing child is a genius because it plays 100% being in the play, in the game, but never forgetting that it's just a game. So always ready to realize that there is also a reality. And then, as a metaphor, we all grown-ups are playing different kind of games, but very often we forget that this is just a game. And there is a reality. So we play our games for real, and sometimes it comes as a problem. So the questions actually I would like to raise, I heard a phrase in the morning, who we trust and who we don't trust. So my question is actually, who the hell are we and who the hell are they? Can we define it? Because a declaration of having common values and trusting or distrusting someone is just a declaration, and quite often it's an illusion that we build because it's comfortable to have illusion that I have people who think similarly, who have similar values, whatever it means. And yet values, attitudes, and all this stuff is very personal and always changing. But it's very uncomfortable idea to think that I'm surrounded by continually changing things that I have every minute to solve this dilemma with. How do I deal with that? And then another question is, of course, what to do, and this is the actual question for this panel discussion, what to do if someone doesn't want to play with us, or if we want to play, if we don't want someone to join our game. And now I shut up and I let our guests to present themselves and whatever they have to say, and then I might present some more questions. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I do have slides as well, so perhaps I will go through. Maria Murumaa-Mengel, and I work as an associate professor of media studies in University of Tartu, and my main research and teaching area is digital stuff. So social media, communication, media and information literacies, and all of that good stuff, but also horrible stuff. Because especially the past year has given me a different view on many things. We started with a one-year-long master's program that is called Disinformation and Societal Resilience, which has brought together experts, budding experts, or people who feel very passionately about disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, the general incivility in online spaces that has an overspill to not online spaces as well. So if we're talking about digital stuff, then it always is augmented stuff, because it never stays only in the digital sphere. So for a year now, I've had the chance to talk about disinformation, harassment, incivility, digital communication culture with people who have very different perspectives on this matter. And this was my question to myself when I was invited here, which I'm really honored to be here. Should we always try to build bridges, or should we sometimes not do that? Because we do have a problem, like a huge problem, right? And I think that when we talk about information disorder, everything that is happening in the informational spaces today, you all know that it's polarized, it's getting nasty, there are some serious power relations and power hierarchy issues, and our attention is being hoarded. Attention economy does not value the original, the good, the moral, the ethical. Attention economy values everything that draws our attention. And that usually means it has to be scary, it has to make us angry, it has to evoke strong emotions. So that's how the main capital flows go today. People who hoard that fear, anger, the best, they will gain access to various goods and capitals. So that means that we have seen deliberate or accidental erosion of trust amongst very many different groups. We're seeing increasing fighting, infighting, just you have to be against or for something. And for the next two slides, I do apologize because they are full of vile stuff. But this should not come as a surprise. One of the slides is in Estonian mainly, one of the slides is in English to accommodate many languages. One of them is really fresh overview, and one of them is 15 years old already. So this is the first one. It's in Estonian. Are you feeling shocked, Estonians? Does this surprise you? There's some vile stuff. There's some nasty stuff there. But we have grown accustomed to, come on dummy, that's the internet. That's the online public sphere. Haven't you gotten to know that already? You're a professor, so you should know it. So the sad thing is that we have accepted this as the communication norm in digital public spaces. Not only private, there is some private spaces as well, but also in public spaces. We see these types of comments under our president's Facebook page, under news pages, everywhere. In English, that's an old one, and that's gendered harassment, because so much of that type of information tends to be heavily gendered. Not only. Race plays an issue. Everything that has the potential to divide us is used immensely. What can be done? Because we could just stick with these and be like, okay, we're doomed. There's nothing to do. But we have much to do. And I'm happy to see that Marju Lauristin was using the metaphor of a cake, and I do continue with that. Because we're talking about the metaphor of anti-disinfo cake. Of course, disinformation is a generalization because so much of it is misinformation or just plain old malinformation, harassment, hate speech, and so on. First, we have to figure out how to restrict information manipulations. So no bridging there. We don't need to bridge everything, right? We can silence some things. We can filter some things. We can socially sanction some things. We can show our disapproval of things. But that's the problem, in my opinion. For 20 years, we have been taught in public campaigns, in our education systems, by people like me, I have given lectures on that topic, to shut up, to just don't leave digital traces, don't argue with the trolls, just ignore it, move forward, keep your digital spheres, untouched, don't post, don't do anything. But now we have grown so accustomed to that we never do. We don't intervene. So if we compare the digital public sphere to physical public spheres, if you see someone in a public space that is acting completely out of control, you do something. You either call for help from, judicial norms and police, or you intervene yourself. You look at them in an angry manner. You say, hey, don't do that. Think about the stereotype of an old angry lady in a bus who is like, why don't you stand up? I'm here, I need to sit down here. We need more older angry ladies to show up in the digital spheres, to actually do the social sanctioning, to create new social norms in the communication sphere. Because otherwise, we are just like, okay, yeah, we lost that. But considering that the digital sphere is increasingly important for people to get news, over 60% of people say that they get their news from social media. So I say we can't give that up. Supporting the media and trying to push for the turn of journalistic, professional, quality media to social media. So it's not just something that we do on the side, but it's actually one of the main fields for journalism. It's probably the second tier of the disinfo cake. Educating audiences, obviously, as a person who is working in higher education and education circles, this is really important to me. Exposing influence activities, keeping things in order, in that sense that in order to have any kind of social cohesion, we need to have some anchors. We need to be able to trust some institutions, rules to exist. And of course, international cooperation, because so much of the information disorder is created deliberately, very often from our neighboring country. So we have to build resilience and resistance. Resilience comes usually from like the large macro scale interventions that have to be very, like long years and so on. So media and information literacies as education, but also to support and normalize people stepping up and speaking up when they see that something is going on that they don't disagree with. Thank you very much. Feeling all passionate.
Hi, hello. My name is Bridget Kendall, and I'm a former journalist with the BBC, based in Moscow from 1989 to 94, and then Washington, and then a roving brief as senior diplomatic correspondent overall for over 30 years. And then I moved into higher education and was at Cambridge University for 7 years. My term there has ended, so I now speak as a private assistant in a private capacity. And I wanted to start, we heard from Professor Lauriston, she went back in history, and I also wanted to take us back and start with a historical perspective from a different era, because I first came to the Baltic states during the Cold War in the 1980s, initially as a student and then as a journalist. And as you know, and as some of you remember, the Soviet Communist Party and its security apparatus imposed its will and a veneer of control over its entire empire, including not just the Soviet republics, also the Baltic states, and to some extent countries of Eastern Europe. We all know the ways in which that control was exercised, some very similar to what we see today in Putin's Russia. Threat of job loss and prison was one of them. A stifling diet of blanket state propaganda and a closed information space imposed through draconian censorship was another. And language was also another tool of coercion. Russian was the lingua franca in the Soviet Union, and everyone was required to learn and speak it. But as we heard from Professor Lauriston, language was also a way to fight back. Your native tongue, here in the Baltics, in Ukraine, in Georgia, in other places, was a way to protect your identity and remain linked to your local community and protect the national memory of your own history through private interactions with those you knew well and could trust. And even Russians, the language in their case was Russian, but a different, free-thinking sort of Russian, was a way to maintain your integrity and your belief in yourself, your connection to family and close friends, to find comfort through a shared experience of internal exile. Frank conversations around the kitchen table that provided a counter-narrative to the official propaganda. I like to hope that a lot of that is happening in Russia today. Today, in places like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, the tables are turned. As we've been discussing, Baltic governments want to encourage other ethnicities to learn to speak the national languages of the Baltic states as well as their native tongues to help promote integration. And it seems to me it's good to remember that recent past, to keep clear why today's situation is different. Of course, this is not the Soviet Union. This is a democratic state. It's not totalitarian. It's not an imperial power. And there's an added challenge, the aggressive, powerful neighbor bombarding locals with distorting propaganda from across the border. But it seems to me the key point should be underlined, and it's been made, I think, more than once today, that we must take care to make sure that the policies of integration always remain collaborative, as any hint of coercion, as used to happen in the Soviet Union, creates a backlash where minorities retreat into enclaves that then might threaten or fragment the host nation, the very outcome the aim is to avoid. If you like, in Professor Joseph Nye's well-used terminology, language learning must remain a tool of soft, not hard power, a means to make people want to become like others or join with them, not be forced to be like them. Thinking back over those final years of the Soviet Union is also a reminder of how different the access to global information was then. Very few people outside the Communist Party in the Soviet Union were able to, Communist Party elite, were able to travel or even have much access to information from abroad. It's hard to remember or you imagine if you weren't there now. So confirmation for Russians that their internal private world had international validity and support came not through linking up with like-minded people via VPNs or watching foreign YouTube videos, as happens now in Putin's Russia. In that pre-internet age, any glimpses of the outside world came through external broadcasts from other countries. TV and radio from Finland here, for East Germans from West Germany, and in Russia through international shortwave broadcasts from the BBC, Voice of America, Radio Liberty. People used to tune into them out in the countryside where they went to their dachas for weekends. The Soviet Communist Party tried to block these broadcasts through jamming. But as time went on, it was a losing battle, partly because the endless Soviet propaganda messages of that era about glorious grain harvests rang hollow. They were so clearly at odds with the grim realities of the empty shops and long queues of everyday life. For a long time, I thought propaganda doesn't work anymore in our modern world. And I was really shocked to discover how well Putin's government has managed to hone propaganda which does seem to have an impact. It's worth thinking about why it works. And I think it's something to do with how much the gap there is or is not between how people perceive their own lives and what they're hearing in this propaganda. In the late Soviet period, everybody thought it was ridiculous. But it was also difficult for the Soviet authorities to maintain a closed information space as the new digital world began to emerge. So in the 1980s, typewriters of samizdat gave way to Xerox copying machines. Overnight, the dissemination of forbidden literature became easy and prolific. At first, the Soviet government used to try and clamp down on those copying machines. I remember in the mid-1980s visiting a joint venture in Moscow which had a Xerox machine which was kept in a metal cage. And every night a policeman would come and lock the cage and padlock it and seal it with a wax seal to make sure that no one crept in during the night to use it to copy forbidden literature. Likewise, the shortwave radios at the Dacha gave way to satellite TV dishes. I remember a conversation with one of Mikhail Gorbachev's reformist allies, Alexander Yakovlev, then in charge of ideology for the Politburo. And in the mid to early 80s, he was asked, just before Perestroika, he was asked by the Communist Party if it was possible to jam TV satellite broadcasts as well as shortwave radio. He told me that at the time, remember he was a reformer, they were particularly jamming down Kutuzovsky Prospekt, where most of the Soviet elite lived, so they'd think that the radio didn't work, but actually they weren't particularly bothering about shortwave radio out in the countryside. And he duly reported back to the Politburo that it would be far too expensive to jam satellite TV. Within a few years, by the end of the 80s and early 90s, as the Soviet Union teetered on collapse, the first laptops appeared, the first mobile phones and pagers, the first tentative steps towards global live rolling TV news. By now, Gorbachev had lifted censorship and introduced his policy of glasnost to try to wake up society and encourage Soviet people to embrace his reforms. And the genie, as we know, was out of the bottle. The explosion of digital information and connectivity in the early internet days of the 90s was exciting and empowering for journalists like myself. It opened up so many opportunities to report from remote locations, to deliver historic events live as they were happening. We all take it for granted now. Then it was new and extremely exciting. But for someone like myself, already then, working for a global media organization like the BBC, it was also unnerving No longer did terrestrial broadcasters and powerful national newspapers have a monopoly on what information was delivered to and consumed by their audiences. Multiple global TV and radio stations appeared competing for space, joined by bloggers and citizen journalists, all claiming to be authentic voices and demanding to be heard and read. Making your own voice count as a BBC correspondent amidst this clamour became harder. I found maintaining a voice of authority that was still respected and believed and listened to, rather than the often sensational competition we've just been hearing about, was an increasing challenge. Then in the late 2000s, once connectivity of laptops and smartphones improved, social media and digital networks took off. No longer were information networks exclusively vertical, top-down, a news bulletin chosen and delivered to you by a professional news team in a particular country. Now they could be horizontal. Information pick and mixed and shared between like-minded individuals or communities, regardless of national borders, all over the world. And with that revolution in information sharing came, of course, the darker trends we've just been hearing about. The manipulators, the groomers, the fraudsters, the algorithms that give more of the same, perpetuating prejudices and screening out alternative viewpoints, creating echo chambers that reinforce divides. And a new and troubling trend where it seems that more and more people around the world no longer even seem to care if they're subjected to falsehoods, either by bots and trolls or even the political leaders they vote for. This conference here is partly about the challenges you face in integrating communities with different mother tongues and encountering a new onslaught of propaganda from over the border aimed at stirring up fears and divisions. By way of contrast and comparison, I thought I'd bring to you some recent examples from my country, from the United Kingdom, where we too have faced problems of divided communities, raising the prospect of fragmentation, division, and unrest. And I want to focus on three examples. The first, the Scottish referendum of 2014, when Scotland could have voted to leave the United Kingdom, but luckily didn't. The Brexit vote of 2016, when the population of the UK narrowly did vote to leave the European Union, a seismic change in the country and one we're still paying the price for. And this year, recent riots across the country this summer, fueled by online postings triggered by the shooting in southern England, which killed 3 little girls. So the Scottish referendum. This didn't come out of the blue. A movement campaigning for Scotland to restore its lost nationhood had been fueled by long historical memories of injustices and recent frustrations that Scotland didn't see more of the profits from North Sea oil and gas. It wasn't a language issue. Not many Scots outside the fringes of the Highlands and Islands speak Gaelic, unlike in Wales, where Welsh is a powerful force for reinforcing national identity among many of the Welsh, and there is a national movement, but nothing like with the power of what was in Scotland. I first became aware of the Scottish independence movement, ironically, here in the Baltic states, when I used to report on the independence movements here from 1989 onwards. And BBC Scotland was always asking for more reports. They said, people here want it as a blueprint for what Scotland might do one day. When Tony Blair became Prime Minister in 1997, he gave more devolved powers to regional governments, including Scotland, and from then on, Scotland in particular developed a more separate identity. When David Cameron became Prime Minister, he decided to agree to a referendum in 2014 as a plan to see the idea off, get rid of it. It turned out to be a highly risky endeavour. A couple of weeks before the vote, a poll suggested the Scots might break away. And we all went to bed that night wondering if we might wake up in another country, truncated and maimed by a sizable tranche of the North disappearing. In the event it didn't happen, Scotland stayed in the UK. But for me, and for many others I suspect, it was a wake-up call. National unity could not be taken for granted. And we, in the media, had not paid sufficient attention to the sense of grievance and alienation from England that many Scots felt. And polls still show that though the appetite for Scottish independence has abated somewhat for various reasons, it's not gone away, especially among younger people. I'm not sure that the media could have done more during that referendum campaign to encourage people to stay in the UK. That was not our job. We were there to report on what different people felt, not to influence them. I think it was more anyway about political and economic realities than what happened in the information space. Now there's a Labour rather than Conservative government in power in Westminster. Many Scots feel less alienated. They have a more socialist mindset than quite a lot of people in England. The economic shock of COVID, the insecurities of today's world, a Scottish nationalist party that has imploded for internal reasons, and the fact Scotland would have to join a long queue to rejoin the EU, these are all factors which have subdued the appetite for independence for the moment. But like the Baltics, part of the emotional desire to break away in Scotland is rooted in history, and for my part, I wouldn't be surprised if in my lifetime it did happen, and the concept of the UK would have to be entirely rethought, perhaps with knock-on implications for other constituent parts of the UK, Wales and Northern Ireland. So that's Scotland. The Brexit vote. This was another festering sore which had split the Conservative Party for years, and David Cameron hoped this would be another referendum to see off the idea in 2016. But as we all know, the vote went another way, narrowly in favour of leaving. I'll never forget the shock of waking up and finding that the UK had voted for Brexit. I saw it as a terrible mistake and couldn't understand how so many people had voted to leave. And again, I think those of us in the mainstream media and many of the UK's leading institutions, like Cambridge University, where the city voted to stay in the EU, but all the villages around Cambridge voted to leave, we have to admit our failure to listen and recognise the views and mood of a significant sector of the population, that we, a metropolitan and cosmopolitan elite, were out of touch with much of the rest of the country. In 2016, this was still a new idea. I think since then, we've seen the same tendency elsewhere, notably in 2 US elections that have brought Trump to power. Rural versus urban, older versus younger generation, richer versus poorer, one more suspicious of outsiders and of change, is part of a general trend we see across the UK, the US, we see it in Europe. It manifests itself particularly in attitudes to immigration. And I think it's a lesson to those of us in the UK anyway, in the media, in political and educational elites, to reach out more, to get outside our own bubbles and be more attuned to what others say, even if it is views that we find difficult to agree with. Less broadcasting from on high, more listening, more paying attention to the local, engaging with local leaders and local communities to reach parts of the country where voices are not so easily heard. That brings me finally to this summer's riots, which raises a different problem, a problem which we just heard about a minute ago. The riots were triggered by a knife attack on a dance class in southern England, which killed 3 little girls. It caused an outcry that very soon spiraled out of control. The riots were the worst case of social unrest in England and Northern Ireland for over a decade, including arson, looting, racist and Islamophobic attacks, anti-immigrant sentiments. But what was particularly troubling and something of a shock was how fast the unrest spread, seemingly unorganized, because it was fueled by online posts which quickly clocked up audiences of thousands, including from activists posting from abroad. These posts were based on false claims that the perpetrator might have been a Muslim and an asylum seeker. In fact, though his parents originally came from Rwanda, the 17-year-old was born in Wales and was a British citizen. He is due to stand trial in January. The government took a tough line. Well over 1,000 people were arrested and hundreds charged and many put in jail. And what was good was that there was also a strong counter-response from local communities to show solidarity with those who'd been attacked and help those whose shops and mosques had been damaged. But it raised a troubling question for the mainstream media. In a world where online posts from half a world away can trigger riots across the country based on misinformation, how do you counter that trend? Exposing the fraud is one way, But if you're the BBC in a world where an increasing number of people, especially young people, go elsewhere to get informed, including from dubious internet sources, the biggest challenge is to make sure you're heard in the first place. The BBC has something called Reality Check, which tries to check out and analyse and give facts behind claims to show up, to reveal and expose claims that are false. But there's always a worry that we're preaching to the converted. The audience for that are people who respect that point of view already. So one way is to have a rigorous social network policy to post on platforms that will have an impact. Another is to invest in investigative reports to expose cases of fraud, manipulation, and if possible, confront the fraudsters and tricksters responsible, and put a lot of effort into giving a lot of publicity to try to break through into public consciousness. The BBC had one online report that had a lot of play, where it tracked down one online activist in Finland, whose posts had directly fueled those riots. But it's also, I think, the responsibility of governments. There's a new UK Online Safety Act, which puts the onus for the first time much more on service providers to do more to manage risks caused by illegal and harmful content. Maybe this will work in the UK. Maybe it'll work in Europe. I worry that in the United States, that's now going to have President Trump with Elon Musk by his side, that may be much more difficult. And in our world of porous borders, national legislation can only help so far. It's hard to come up with answers that provide a solution to this evolving set of challenges, an increasingly hostile environment for truthful reporting and peace building. Maybe conferences like this, pooling experience across borders and disciplines, is the sort of thing that can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget.
So the mic is working, right? It should be on. Now it's on. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'll try within the next couple of minutes to be both, to give you something useful and to reflect immediately the invitation, the request made by Maria. I'll try to play a role of a grumpy lady, grumpy schooler, paying attention to maybe not so usual filters when we are discussing trust. But first of all, I'll be speaking in my private and personal capacity. In my professional capacity, I work with a great organization. I work with IREX, which is a global NGO. The organization is working in 100 countries, and the experience on building trust is absolutely amazing. That's why when I promised you to give something useful, I will give you some tips from my colleagues. They just published a new framework on building trust, and it is called Cultivating Community, a framework for building trust in leaders and institutions. And there are three main blocks. I hear this click, 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 click. Yeah, so maybe it's time to write down something. I promise it will be useful if you're working in this area. So the main blocks my colleagues are addressing are demonstrating competence. So it is not only enough to to increase your confidence, you need also to demonstrate it. The second block is showing good intent. We already discussed it on the level of empathy, on other levels. And the third block, general block, is promoting belonging. And my colleagues are suggesting 7 practices to foster trust. And these practices are made in the form of guide. This is not like a checklist, so to do check, 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 but you can make your own combinations. You can select what works for you. So number 1, we already heard this idea today, unite people against shared community challenges. So this is not only enough to unite, but you have to unite them in action. And a good challenge is a good practice, how to start it. Number 2, elevate ethics. This is something new for today's discussion, starting from the morning session. In my opinion, fully dedicated to trust. So elevate ethics, it means be explicit about what you expect. at the same time what could be expected from a public leader or from you if you are a leader. And in this case, I want to also reflect the panel when politicians discussed what they are doing in the field, when they are reflecting what is going on and how to build trust as well. Number 3, invest in long-term relationships. So this is not only enough with just one activity or one interaction. You have to be present. You have to be present with your actions. And the idea is that you need to keep showing up. You need to keep showing up with your activities. Number 4 is don't. So this is not what to do. This is what it's better to avoid doing. So ask for input and then ignore it. And I think when it comes to many practices also related to government, it's the case. So when you are asking, when people are sharing their ideas, and later they do not see these reflections. So, and this definitely is not a way how to build trust. This is a way how to destroy trust. Number 5 also is don't. Don't rely on a single leader. So you will not be able to build in this fabric of trust with only one person. So it should be a community, it should be a network. Number 6, tell a compelling story. And I think this also is the key, and we can reflect to stories we heard today, the stories of how people decided to build trust when it comes to mixing identities, when it comes to new languages. But my question to you is now, if you work in the field of trust, do you have these stories? How do you work with these stories? And number 7 is, I think, the toughest one. Take responsibility. And I will take my responsibility as a scholar now, so I'm switching fully into my private and academic identity, and I will address some challenges. Also today, we've been exposed to different types of surveys, right? We saw a lot of indexes, reflections to indexes, some ideas of mainly quantitative data, not a lot on the side of qualitative data. So my idea is that when it comes to measurements, nothing is simple. And it is crucial to remember that there are unknown knowns when it comes to, in our region, wartime sociology. And we need to understand that when we are discussing disinformation, it is not only that we are building trust in this laboratory-like, brilliant conditions, when we have our gloves, we have our society, and we are engineering. We have an elephant in the room, and this elephant is present, and the ultimate goal of this elephant is to destroy trust. So someone is here to destroy trust. And when it comes to my grumpy scholar identity, I do not use the idea of information space. Why I do not use the idea of information space, and this is in the title? Because when we are using when we understand the conditions we live in, and it is a warfare, and when we understand that it is on the level of cognitive side, so we have to switch into the filter of military implementations. In the military implementation, we can see that information space is related to gadgets. Information space is related to cables. When it comes to human minds, it is cognitive space. And is it even space? So we spend a full day here together. I would doubt that I have the same outcomes as you do, since at the very beginning I had issues with the gadget. I used the headset. So I do not know what the minister said, because I had problems with the gadget, right? Later on, it was in English, and then when it was in Estonian, it's language-related issues. So I had noise, literally noise in my headset, because it was quite difficult for me to understand. Later on, and translational service did absolutely great job. But when we had a panel with politicians, they talked simultaneously, a couple of them, and translators tried to tell, now this one is speaking and this is inaudible. And so for me it was so difficult to follow. And At the same time, I was following also the mindset that they suggested. So, filter number one, if it is a cognitive warfare, is it enough for us to speak about literacies and to be focused on media literacies? Is it about media at all? Is it about information? Is it about the stimulus? Or it is about a human? So my approach is that from media literacy approach, from media-centric approach, when we want to solve the problems related to society, we need to move to human-centric approach. And when it comes to human-centric approach, so it's, of course, there are different levels. So it's a group level, it's societal level. But let's go back to the human. And when we understand this human, and when we see all these indexes, and when we try to fit a personality in these indexes, it could be a trap. It could be a trap to make some measurements publicly available without a proper context. And the proper context is that you do not need to fit yourself in this column, in this column, so you can have these different diverse identities. And I think that we need to be responsible, and as scholars we should take responsibility when it comes to measurements, since I think that you could provide damage without putting these data in a proper context. What else do I want to address in these opening remarks? When it comes to adversaries, they are adopting a long-term strategy, right? When it comes to build trusting exercise, we also need to have a long-term strategy. So this is not a short distance run. So we need to be prepared for a long-term investments. But when it comes to measurements, we also have to follow long-term perspective. Even there, even with a long-term approach, you can get into the trap. And we managed to get into brilliant trap back to 2021 with my great, brilliant colleague Dmitry Tseparik. We did a research on disinformation resilience practices in the Baltic, and also with Dalia Bankauskaitė covering Lithuania. And we had the same set of questions. With the same set of questions, we get to the same people. So it's a longitudinality, the same set of questions, and the same people. In year one, when we addressed them, their responses were so positive. So we are dealing good, we are good in this, we are good in that. A year later, the same people said that we didn't develop, we are not developing. So when you are checking reality, you see that the reality is getting better. So they definitely increased, they can prove with the fact that they increased their capabilities. When it comes to self-reflection, so self-reflection showed that they decreased. And it also was a trap. It was a great academic discussion for us. But why I want, I will stop here, and then we will get into the discussion. Maybe you will have questions. But I think that in many questions, unfortunately I didn't understand a lot of these questions. Why? Because the majority of slides were in Estonian. And when it comes to a person is showing to the slides, right? But I wasn't able to follow, since translators, they were busy with the spoken speech, not busy with the visuals showed. But I think that many surveys also were based on self-reflection. So we need to be focused on these possible damages and traps. And I will stop here.
Thank you.
Hello, how are you holding up? I hope, now it's maybe from a not so academic perspective. I'm Claudia from Germany. I'm a producer, a filmmaker, and I want to talk about our feature film, which will be shown tonight, so you will hopefully also be able to see it. And I hope we can all move around later, but before that I will hopefully show you some moving images first. But first of all, I want to talk about the film. The title is called Turning Tables, which is actually the English title, and we have a German title which is called Clandestine. And with this year's festival, the Prof, we also have an Estonian title, which is Salajas. I practiced it with Sven yesterday. Was it okay? Salajas. It means, like the German title, it means hidden or in secret. And we talked a lot today about trust, so maybe it's about our characters who are also not really trusting each other. But before I will start to tell you a little bit about the film, what's going on, I will start with a quote by Audre Lorde. You probably know her. She was an American writer, intersectional feminist, poet, philosopher, civil rights activist, and so much more. And she said, it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And I came up with this quote because I thought it may also fit to our film we tried to make, and we made it, so we were able to do it. And the film is about turning tables. It follows British artist Richard, who lives in Tanger in Morocco. And he can no longer afford to live in his British homeland in London anymore. So with his help, with the help of Richard, the young Moroccan boy Malik, who wants to become a rapper, makes it to Europe, which is the destination of his dreams. And he makes that in an illegal way. Unexpectedly, the conservative EU politician Matilda, who is dealing with her own struggles, ends up hiding Malik in his Frankfurt apartment. And Matilda's assistant, with her name Amina, who is frustrated being labeled as a second-generation migrant, is delegated as cultural meditator. It seems complex, and it is. And to give you a glimpse of that, we are now watching the 4-minute promo material, which we actually haven't shown before. So you're the first audience for that. So to quickly try to put it in the discussion, today's discussion, because of course I struggled a bit to try to make the connection. But I think our film fits because it represents or it presents 4 perspectives and reveals, without actually being a love story, it reveals as a thriller about personal feelings and political dimensions, the individual longing for a different life, the search for love, and realizing its absence. So it raises questions about society and how we want to live in Europe as such. We, as filmmakers, are dealing with emotions, so this is our way to try maybe to find an answer to what you are also trying in your academic work, in your daily work. And we tried that we are presenting characters on their journey who are challenging and they are confronting us. We are dealing with stereotypes. We are dealing with biases, and we engage with diverse perspectives in today's polarized and very political world. So our film makes the attempt to present those perspectives without judgment, allowing them to coexist alongside each other. And we tried that each perspective is given equal weight in terms of screen time, visual style, and also emotional depth. And on a meta level, what we are dealing right now out of our filmmaker bubble, we are also facing the challenge of how to promote this kind of film, because it's not easy. It's not easy to communicate. And we have made the experience that whenever people are at the cinema, they are touched, they feel the emotions, but for example, how can we make them to go to the theater? How can we actually communicate our film? So that's our current challenge as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. I would bring the first question on you, actually. Well, always when we try to change something, when whoever we are, see problem in something, we sooner or later come to the point where in able to change the thing, you have to change attitudes of people or you have to discuss values, as I told before, and you deal with identity. And one of the biggest problem is that approaching one grown-up approaching another one with the message, you got wrong attitude, I've got the right attitude, you have to adopt my attitude and then everything will be all right, doesn't really work, actually. It creates even more conflict situations, and it definitely does not change the attitude for, as I see, the better. How would you say, does creative industry like film or theater or whatever, does it have more possibility to get to the level where the actual change of the attitude is possible? Even though you are not moralizing, you are not saying what is right or wrong, but you make people start to feel and to think and to get like own opinion on that. But do you think it's got something that others don't?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think we know from the past that propaganda is the word for that. So we should be very precise about our work. So I think everything, also doing a documentary like we have seen the team before, it's also a manipulation, because what do you put in the film? What don't you put? Where's the edit? Like, it's all about being precise and being aware of what you actually present as maybe reality or the things you show, which is a fiction or if it's a documentary. I don't know if we are different than other media formats, like also theater or museum or art in general. I think we don't want to be manipulative. But in a way, probably we are also acting out of our bubble. So we are also, in a way, filmmakers who is actually able to become a filmmaker and who is not able to tell the story. So I was not really on your page in the beginning when you talked about diversity, because I think it's an important question to raise, who is capable and have the, the role to actually go to a film school, to even come up with the idea to become a filmmaker. So I did not really answer another question. I raised another question, but it's, I hope not, to say the least.
Thanks. Another question for actually more or less all of you. They say that nobody was killed today is not a news. This and that amount of people were killed today is a news. And that's what you mentioned before in your speeches, more or less all three of you. So the common answer to this kind of phenomena is that they all lying, especially if we have situation of conflict, whether it's in the Ukraine or in the Middle East or wherever. When there is a conflict, there is always a propaganda, a counter-propaganda, and then it's very, very easy to get a feeling, they're all lying. And then I ask myself, am I interested enough in this subject to spend like 3 hours searching through the internet, filtering all kinds of other lies from different sides to get closer to the truth? And doesn't it leading also in to creating this kind of bubbles that people stay in, which is actually the topic of the conference? So how would you respond on that? Yeah.
So more and more people worry that the sources of information they get can't be trusted. And as I said, there's a worrying trend, I think, that more and more people don't care. And they even hear politicians say one thing one day and a different thing the next day and still vote for them. I think it used not to be like that. This is a new trend, and I'm sure we can analyze why it has come about in this maelstrom of information that the internet has unleashed. But there are moments when something happens which is urgent, which is real news. I mean, I'm a long-time news journalist, but I must say quite a lot of the news all the time isn't really very newsy. I mean, it's kind of obvious, you know, one event leads to another. If somebody dies, there will be a funeral. That's sort of sacrilegious to say, but it's obvious, isn't it? But there are news events which come out of the blue, which really matter. You know, the outcome of the American election, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the emergence in Europe of the COVID pandemic was one, when all those old people were dying in Italy. And at moments like that, mainstream traditional broadcasters or news organizations like the BBC do find that people flock to them. Because at those moments, you need to get the closest you can to something you might trust. Even if it's not as entertaining or sensationalist or easy to find, because it's not in your Facebook feed, you have to look for it. During the COVID pandemics, the BBC did some research in the United States, which is a very contested market for information, and found that the BBC was the source that first of all, people would go to their Facebook page or look on what was then Twitter or whatever, and then they would go to the BBC to check whether it was true or not. So that was quite a comfortable place for the BBC to be. Okay, we weren't first, we weren't as exciting, but we were the check place where people went to see if it was true. When in 2014, when Putin took Ukraine, and again in 22 when he invaded Ukraine, the BBC Russian service spiked because people in Russia sought it out to check what the BBC was saying as a kind of to count. So that's a bit reassuring that in crisis, but you're right, it doesn't last. I don't think people go to the BBC to find out about health stories now. They're not reading Ukraine stories now. They've got crisis fatigue. And then that's a challenge. How do you keep people wanting to be informed with something where there are professional journalists really trying to provide an accurate picture? And I don't think we've got an answer to that.
Ooh, you have some questions there, and we have 10 minutes. I think we could push platforms to take responsibilities. They are taking our data, they are taking our money, so perhaps like a little nice change for responsibilities as well. Because right now we've seen that it's a jungle. Things have become ungoogleable. Systems have been broken that we have relied on. So for sure, these actors have to step up. But it's super hard to pressure the platforms. Although European Union is trying their best right now, I have little hope for that. And perhaps you have ideas how to do that more efficiently. But also when we look at youth studies, then young news audiences say that they are practicing media avoidance strategies, avoiding a certain topic, avoiding a certain platform, a person, you know, different formats of avoidance. They are doing it because they see in the news these representations of hopelessness. And one thing that the kids and the teens are asking from journalism is to have a hopeful, solution-oriented perspective somewhere in there, so that their generation won't feel like, well, everything is shit, I might as well not do anything. So I think that that's the little tweak that we have to do in journalism as well, to keep that balance in mind even more. Because so far, at least in Estonia, it has been very conflict-centered, so that's the main newsworthiness criteria. Does it have a conflict in it? Right now, I think we have to readjust it. And also ask what news is, because for my 11-year-old kid, the newest updates of Minecraft or what's happening in the Roblox sword stock market, whatever, is news. So what is news even? Should be perhaps somehow furthered and combined with traditional news.
I will pick up here on kids. and I will defend the power of lie when it comes to kids, since when they are requesting something from journalism, they have to have a pre-ready mindset, right? And there are some ways how to address the kids, and one of the way is to address them through the fairy tale. And what is the fairy tale? It's a storytelling, and it is based on lie. But in the story, you can provide a mindset how to deal later with media. Here in Estonia, you have a brilliant example of fairy tale, how in one of the forests, imagined animals defended trust. In Latvia, I also have a couple of examples, including mine, when you are on the academic level, you are creating practices of pre-banking for preschool students. When it comes to the story of fairy tale, it's a wolf manipulator who tries to trick animals. And every time when I receive from Moldovan news that they have Muppet shows based on a story I created for the kids, I feel that this power of lie could be used for good. So, but the question is about the mindsets. And what you just packed in your question is the mindset. Should I check it? Should I understand it? Maybe this is not also about the check in itself. And maybe it is not about a fact itself, fact valuable or not valuable. This is a trustfulness of a fact. Do you want to trust in this information or not? With this, I'm like, combined the first intervention with the second.
Okay, thank you. I think it was you who spoke about qualitative and quantitative researches, and I think that maybe majority, or at least half of the people sitting here, are involved in one or another way into different kind of researches. I think there is also another phenomena between making researches and publishing them, and then what media does with the results. And one of the best examples is from Finland, where they say Finland is the most happiest country in the world. We made a research about that. And then if you go around and ask people, are you happy? They even still might be very proud of that Finland is considered the happiest country. And the reason for that is that the questions people were asked has nothing to do with feeling happy. They have to do with assumption that if this and this and these things are working, then people must feel happy. And they're already there, they went wrong, and then the result is presented as the Finland is the most happiest country in the world. So what do you think? Because most of trusted experts, even we speak about integration or security matters or social media questions, they all most of them base their statements on some kind of researches. And most of the researches is actually quantitative because we don't trust qualitative researches as much as, yeah, unfortunately, that's an impression I have at least. So how can you make this thing work better? Because I have the feeling that they don't really, they are not doing the same thing. They are like going different directions. I'm sorry for my questions.
Well, I'm a hammer-nail kind of girl, so scientists have to be where their audiences are. So they cannot rely on only journalistic media to do the mediation, but they have to be there as influencers. They have to go and get personal and talk about the work that they do with their own faces, with all the dangers, with all the risks that come with it, all the discomfort that comes with it, and just do it. Because all the others are talking there, all the esoteric, howl to the moon and take MMS drops and whatever, they are there, they are doing their jobs. But the scientists are not. So that's my answer.
Well, if I was just thinking, and if I was asked, I'm not doing it anymore, but if I was asked to do a report on ethnic diversity in Estonia, and someone gave me Mary Lauriston's research, I would probably say, fine, but I need to go to Narva and talk to people. And then I also need to talk to them maybe in Tartu and Tallinn, so that it wouldn't just be about data, it would be about people. Now that's an inexact science, and there's a derogatory term that journalists use, vox pops. We just go out and stick a microphone under someone's nose, and then you talk to lots of different people and you choose the ones that fit your story. But I must say that over many decades of covering elections, in all sorts of places, including the Soviet Union, the early elections, but also here and the United States and Britain and many other countries, I always found going to a polling station and talking to people as they came out was very reflective of the vote. And the way it worked was you had to give people at least 20 minutes. So you didn't just ask them one question and get a quick answer, which is hard to interpret. So this is back to data and polling. You had 20 minutes to understand the context, to give them a chance not just to give their first answer, but maybe it's their 10th one, where they say something a bit more revealing. And then you can build up a picture. And that way you do two things. One is you interrogate the data a bit, but the other is you put a human face on it, which then means that if you're being the mediator of that academic research, you make it more easy for people to identify with, because if you do a report which is just a load of numbers, people are going to scroll through it.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything on that? All right, then we have some time. I thought I would get some kind of device to read questions that were sent, but I didn't. So maybe I would just improvise and use the time. So okay, thank you. Okay, okay. So the question is, why is a problem if people stays in their bubbles as long as they share same basic values and don't disturb others? I love this sharing.
Okay, I'll give you one answer. Brexit. From my point of view. People stay in their bubbles, they think, I'm all right, my life's nice. Why should we stay in the European Union? What does it give us? And if you don't have a wider perspective to answer the question, what is the reason for international collaboration, joining with others, the benefits that, I couldn't have said this when I was a BBC journalist, by the way, but I can now. The benefits that we've had from joining the EU. For example, it was the impetus that gave women equal pay in Britain. Then if people live in their bubbles, they can blithely think that taking responsible decisions like that change geopolitics, as we've seen in the vote in the United States, they are not aware of the consequences.
And also technologically mediated information bubbles, they tend to get really like a thick membrane. So, ideas bounce around, they amplify, and you get all sorts of very polarized views. And, it very often spirals out of control. And within these bubbles, we're just cognitively built that way. So the human side of it is to view us better than others. So we must be right, we must be good, we must have the right answers, but they over there, they are so wrong. So if these bubbles allow us to have a nice little comfortable, not bothering others kind of relationship, we always bother the others because the others are a part of us. So our relationships with the others, they're always inbuilt. So it's impossible to not bother each other.
Is it?
Now it's -2. Thank you. I think I had in mind that it's the loneliness, the increasing loneliness of people, so it makes people divided from each other. And I think the bubbles are not that huge that there are so many people in the same bubble. And in Germany, we have an increasing political situation, as you know, probably with racism, fascists. So I think it's pretty dangerous. And I think it's not just dangerous, it's already arrived. So I think we must be more like on the political side about togetherness, but togetherness, which does not mean we have to be on the same side regarding different topics, but we have to find a way to talk to each other and to listen to each other, especially. So that's why I think it's very important to at least know what are the bubbles.
Okay, in that case, I say thank you very much for all of you. I think we had a fantastic discussion.
Thank you. Make a round of applause, please. Thank you all.